IOC President Kirsty Coventry. A year into her reign, the first big decision, the gender eligibility rules decided on, the decision to ban transgender women from women's events, to also ban athletes with difference of sex development from women's events too. Transgender women can still compete in men's events. And also, because if you're going to have this ban, you need a way of actually applying it. It means the reintroduction of sex testing, which at the Paris Olympics in 2024, the IOC's messaging then on the Thomas Bach was, we're not going back to the bad old days, but they are introducing these tests.
It's quite interesting, some of the things they've put out about the physical advantages. I think it's like 10 to 12% advantage for males over females in running and swimming, and up to more than 100% in things like boxing, punching, for example. But the thing about the sex testing, when he says the bad old days, I think that, in the bad old days, that's when people were subjected to sort of, physical inspections. I think genetic testing is you can just do it with a saliva swab. It's far less intrusive. So I think that's a difference here.
Yeah, guys, we've been talking about this for 5 years, and I say 5 years because when it comes to transgender athletes in the women's category, there's only ever been one kind of certainly high-profile one that we're aware of, which was Laurel Hubbard, the weightlifter at the Tokyo Olympics, who we covered. At that time, the IOC were very much saying that this is the place for athletes like Laurel to compete in the women's category. In this 5 years, there's been a real shift, and it's very noticeable. One, there's been a change in president. Kirsty Coventry has come in, and she said she was determined to protect the women's category. The other thing, the politics has changed. It's such a polemic. Like, honestly, my inbox, having covered this story, it is just full of one side and the other. And like, there is a very, very kind of aggressive language around this subject, very emotive. For all the numbers Martin's just given, this feels like there's a kind of a political will here. This is what's going to happen now.
Some of the language has evolved. When World Athletics first introduced their ban a few years ago, they talked about those assigned male at birth who now identified as female. The language now is very clearly those transgender women are biological men. Now, some people still have issue if you refer to these athletes as transgender women. They say, no, we should just say they are men. I think you can still have some compassion towards their position in terms of the language as they identify as well, particularly if they've gone through transitions, rather than needing to use the precise sporting terminology it is now. They are defined sporting wise as biological men, but in life they'll identify as transgender women.
Right, yeah, and you're talking about respecting the human being here, and that has been lost, particularly in the kind of bear pit of social media and the like. You look at the comments around this. And in terms of the science, I talked to a guy called Eric Villain. He's a human geneticist at the University of California at Irvine. He'd advised the IOC for about 7 years, up until about 2017, on gender and sex eligibility regulations. And he said the science is not settled at all. His view was, look, this was a decision they wanted to come to in this moment. And this talking about science and evidence and all that gives them the underpinning to come to this position. He said, I wouldn't mind if they said, look, we're a private organization. We want to include transgender and DSD athletes. And whoever's unhappy, you can start a new federation. But they're trying to find kind of more science, etc., to say this is why this has happened.
And we haven't had the full scientific research, hearing from Caster Semenya, the face really of gender eligibility tests, as a DSD athlete who double Olympic champion, then was banned because she refused to take the hormone suppressant treatment. Well, she's questioning where is the science, believing it's unfair that this ban has been introduced.
She wrote a letter with another 8 athletes, all of them from Africa, as well, this week before the decision was announced. I think there was an inkling that this was coming, and they said they have to treat everybody like humans. They've faced all of this pressure for so many years. They've described the past of invasive examinations, forced surgeries, harmful hormonal treatment, and that's led to physical and emotional trauma, and it's come at significant cost. And this thing, reintroducing genetic screening, is not progress. It is walking backwards, she said, Caster Semenya. This is just exclusion with a new name. And, we've always said there was no perfect answer here. Someone and some people were going to lose. And it feels like this is the people who are going to lose, right? And I'm sure a lot of people will be celebrating too, looking at what has been said on social media.
You can quite understand why the women athletes or swimmers, I'm thinking particularly like Leah Thomas, the American swimmer, for example, why they think that is totally wrong. On a sort of base level, I totally understand that and support that. It becomes less clear cut with Caster Semenya, but I still think you still got a situation there if somebody basically has male chromosomes, not a very small percentage of the population does have even more complicated genetic structures. And I think that's probably what the expert you were talking to, Tarek, was referring to. But that's a sort of tiny percentage of people. I think it's okay to have rules which affect 99% of the 0.5% of the population or whatever, and then there are going to be cases which will probably be challenged. But I think it's okay to have those the broad classifications like this.
Yeah, just on the scientist, he's kind of on that, but he also said, look, you're basically saying this Y chromosome in terms of the DSD athletes, this is the single biggest determinant of better performance, because there are all sorts of other factors. He said where the science is not at all certain is this is the biggest determinant. Are other physiological factors more of a benefit? And then you go down the road of bigger questions, and then it becomes very, very complicated, right? In terms of whatever your physiology is, right? Swimmers or athletes, whatever conditions, whatever body they have. And that makes it very, very complicated. Perhaps here with this, using the Y chromosome, they just wanted to draw, I guess, a clean line. Is that fair?
And obviously, we are 3 men discussing women's eligibility in sporting events here. We have covered it closely. Now, at the last Summer Olympics in Paris, there were no transgender women openly competing. So it's not a significant issue for the Olympics yet, but they're getting ahead of it, because we've seen in college sports in the US, some of those competitions that have looked distorted because there are female competition athletes who've gone through male puberty who seemingly do have an advantage from that. And in combat sports as well, the physical advantage can pose safety challenges. And that's something that Kirsty Coventry reflected on, talking about how it can make the difference between winning a medal or not if someone has the physical advantage, as well as the safety issues, as well as the sporting fairness factors.
Yeah, I think that's the sort of key. I mean, there were a couple of years ago, there was a English cyclist who had transitioned in her early 20s, and the times she was getting as a male rider, I think would have beaten the women's Olympic champions. And the plan was that she wanted to transition and compete in the women's events, and clearly the other women cyclists in the British team were very unhappy about that, and actually British cycling ended up changing their own rules because of it. So you can understand that. But you mentioned the Paris Olympics, Rob, and I think there's also quite a good warning here, because we had this absolute furore around 2 boxers. Now, what happened is the International Boxing Association, a sort of fairly discredited federation, which is in fact no longer recognised by the IOC, had declared these two women boxers to have failed sex tests, and they said they shouldn't be competing as women. They both went on and they both won gold medals, and they became the focus of a campaign. But we found out this week that the Taiwanese boxer Ling Yuting, under the new governing body, World Boxing, she's actually passed this test and can compete as a woman. And so, for all this sort of hate that she's received, it turns out totally unwarranted. And people need to be very, very careful before they start making, the campaigners making these accusations. And actually, I saw a couple of people who've written columns about the IOC decision haven't even reflected that. They've referred to this the fact that Ling Yuting had won this medal, but actually hasn't followed the news at all and reported actually. But yes, she won a medal and she was absolutely right to have done so.
And it's going to be now a challenge all around the world about testing and the cost of it and the availability. So we had a chance to speak to Kirsty Coventry about this. And Tarek, your question did raise this issue.
In certain countries, such screenings are banned. For example, in France, you can't do this gender testing. If you are in breach of national laws in some of these places, what is the kind of remedy here for athletes like that?
If it is illegal in a country, athletes will have the possibility when they travel to other competitions to be tested there. This is also why we're saying the policy comes into effect now, but will be implemented in LA 28.
So Kirsty Coventry there replying to you, Tarek.
Yeah, so to me it seems, and she was kind of saying it too, they're not exactly sure how all of this is going to roll out. It will take years to get this done properly, and it will be in force for the Los Angeles Games in 2028, so they've got time. So the example I would give, what I gave there was there was a boxing competition, and there were French boxers who, because of French laws, you can't do gender testing in France. So were unable to get it done, and then arrived in England where the competition was, too late for any of these tests to take place, and they missed the competition. So yeah, you're going to have to set up the rest of the world. And just to be clear, this is what they're saying, right? It's a one-time only test in a career. You just have to do this once, unless there's like some issue with the testing, and then you don't have to do it event by event, year after year. So presumably they're confident this thing can be done, but I just gave the example of where you already have difficulties.
Well, I also had the chance to put a question to Kirsty Coventry, and something I noticed while the press conference was going on, the fact they talked about the fact this would apply to all IOC events. So I suddenly thought, well, that means the Youth Olympics as well, where the age bracket is 15 to 18 years old. There is a strange situation where if you're 13-year-olds, you're eligible for the main Olympics, but you're ineligible for the Youth Olympics. So I asked her about this.
Were there any concerns about having this sex testing applied for the Youth Olympics?
This policy will be for all Olympic events, including youth Olympic events. And this is where it was really important to us, all the recommendations and guidelines in and around the safeguarding that we would like to see in place, the support networks that need to be in place for the athletes. And so this really is, I don't think, is limited to a specific age group of athletes. We want it for all athletes during this implementation process. And I think what's really important also to give a little bit more context is this is the first phase, right? We're now stepping into the second phase where we're going to work with international federations, national Olympic committees, to walk through what implementation looks like, to help develop these safeguarding opportunities, to help ensure that there's counseling being provided, to help ensure that the data and the athlete is being treated in the best way.
The science doesn't appear to have changed. Is it just the fact that legally it's now clear you can introduce such a transgender ban? And how much have you been influenced by Donald Trump calling for this ban on trans athletes?
This was a priority for me way before President Trump came into his second term. So I don't, there's not been any pressure from us to deliver anything from anybody outside of the Olympic movement. This was clearly driven by exactly what Jane has just said. Things have evolved, things have moved forward, and we need to ensure we're doing that.
So that was the response to me. And yes, she was talking about this issue on the campaign trail, but so was Seb Coe, maybe at the forefront, or certainly louder on the issue.
Yeah, and he's acted on this, hasn't he, Martin?
Yeah, World Athletics they were the first international federation to really tackle this whole issue. I think they were sort of forced into it in the Rio 2016 Olympics, when you had the situation in the women's 800 meters where the top 3 athletes were all DSD athletes, differences of sexual development, and that created a big issue, I think, for the other runners in that. Brought it to the attention of Coe and World Athletics, and they basically decided they're going to have to tackle it, and that led to a challenge by Caster Semenya at the Court of Arbitration for Sport in 2018, which ultimately failed.